Hi Year 5, welcome to Wednesday's maths lesson, and we're still looking at line graphs today, but we're going to look at drawing them as well as interpreting them. So pause the video now and have a look at the review task below. Okay, so we're looking at a graph to show the change in Sam's heart rate during exercise. And the first question was, what information can you learn from this graph? So I can see that Sam's heart rate started out, when he started measuring his heart rate, at 70 beats per minute. And then after 5 minutes, he measured it again, and the heart rate had increased ever so slightly to about 75. And then over the next 5 minutes, his heart rate increased quite steeply, and then his heart rate leveled off and stayed at the same beats per minute, which was 110. So he measured it every 5 minutes, and I can see that in the table below as well, but the table isn't finished. I can see that we've got all of the information up to 25 minutes, but then we need the 30 minutes, the 35 minutes, and the 40-minute piece of information. So I'm going to put those on now because it says, can you complete the graph using the data below? And you can see if you've got the same points as me. So if I look at 30 minutes, I'm going to read up the line that crosses the axis at 30. And I'm going to go up to 110 where it meets 110 on the y-axis. And I'm going to make sure that I put my point where those lines meet. So the line that crosses the x-axis at 30 and the line that crosses the y-axis at 110. You might want to use 2 fingers to make sure that you've really got those 2 points exact, or maybe a ruler and a pencil or something like that. So at 35 minutes, his heart rate was 90 beats per minute. So I'm going to go up where the line crosses at 35. I'm going to go up to where it crosses the y-axis at 90 and put my point. I'm just going to check that that is accurate because it must be accurate. Then I'm going to do the same for 40. So 40 is 70 beats per minute. So I'm going to go up the line that crosses the axis at 40 and make sure it meets where it crosses the y-axis at 70. And then what I can do, and I hope you guys did this too, use a ruler and a pencil to continue the line, and we want to continue it really neatly. So carrying on the horizontal line where it stays the same, and then connecting the dots as the heart rate decreases. Okay, so hopefully your line graph looks like mine. In the next task, we're going straight into the guided practice because drawing line graphs takes a little bit of time, and I want to give you maximum time to practice the skill and do some independent practice. So pause the video now and have a little look at the information that you've got, and then we'll go through how to draw the graph. Okay, so the table shows average rainfall in Leicester over a year. So we've got our months of the year going up in time order, and we've got the different rainfall measurements that they collected in millimetres. And it says, draw a line graph to show how the average rainfall changed over the year. So what you've got to think when you're going to draw a line graph are these 3 key questions. So where will you start drawing your line graph? Are you going to start plotting your points? Are you going to start putting numbers down and writing days of the month? Or are you going to need to start actually by drawing your axes? You're going to need those 2 axes, aren't you? So you need to decide which information you're going to put on those 2 axes. Which axis is going to be your x-axis and which one is going to be your y-axis? Now, whenever I've looked at graphs in the past, I have noticed that quite often if it's time, it's along the x-axis. And we've got months, which is time, isn't it? So I'm going to put the months along the x-axis and the rainfall along the y-axis. Then you've got to think, what scale will you use? What will your scale be? So we know that the x-axis scale will be the months, but we'll need to think about how many squares or what space we're going to give to each month so that we can put our labels on lines and they'll be really neat and easy to read. Whenever we're thinking about a numbered scale, if we've got information in number form, what you need to do is you need to think about the piece of data that is the greatest, because then your scale can go from 0 all the way up to that greatest number. And you can think about the size of the scale compared to the number of squares that you've got on your page. So if we just scan down here, look for the biggest number, we've got 60 there, but I can see 65 is there, and that is the greatest one. So now I need to go to my squares. I know I'm going to have the months on the x-axis and the rainfall on the y-axis, and I know I need to count up to 65. Now looking at my squares, I know I don't have 65 squares, so I'm going to need to use a scale that isn't counting in ones, because if I was using ones, I'd have to have 65 squares, wouldn't I? So I could use something like 5s instead, or 10s, and then cut the squares in half, or maybe 2s, and then same type of thing. So you've got to think about your scale compared to the number of squares you've got. I'm going to start by drawing the x-axis. So I know there are 12 months. I could just draw a line of 12, and then I can see how wide that is, if that's going to be wide enough. So if I do 3, and then another 3, and then another 3, and then another 3, that should be 12. So all 3's make 12. Now, looking at that, if I'm going to label the months along the lines, I don't think that that's a lot of space, really. So I don't think it will be as clear as it could be, given that I've got all these other squares that I could use. So I think what I might do is double that up. So instead of having 12 squares, I'm going to use 24 squares, and then I can mark the months on every second square, where every second square ends on the line. So if I do another group, that's 3, 6, 9, 12. So there we go, I should have enough squares now along the x-axis. And along the y-axis, as we said, we need to go up to 65. So I know that 10 5s would be 50, and then I'd need another 3 5s to get to 65. So that's 13 5s altogether. And I know that I can fit 13 there. I've got more than 13 squares. So I'll just count up. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Oh, I think. Oh, sorry, I've just clicked off. That'll be 13, and then I think I'm just going to give it an extra little bit just to show that it's continuous data, because sometimes you might see a little arrow at the end showing that that could continue. Okay, so now I would need to put on my actual labels. So this is where you need to think about where you're going to label your axis. You don't label the spaces. You label the spaces when you do a bar chart, because you're trying to draw bars that fill that space. But because we've got continuous data, we want to label the lines, because remember that when we've been reading our line graphs, we've been looking along where the line crosses that axis to help us get really accurate measurements. Okay, so that would be January, February, we would have March, April, May, June, July, oops, sorry, August, September, October, November, December. Now your little marks will be a lot neater than mine, because you'll be using a ruler and you won't be using a mouse to try and draw. So I won't label them all, but just so you can see, I would label the first one as January. Okay. And I would label the line rather than the space. And then I need to do the same, thinking about my y-axis. So I'd always start at 0, and then I would count up in 5s, wouldn't I? So that would be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and so on and so forth. And again, your lines will be really neat. So then once you've labelled your axes and you've actually put all the numbers on, you would need to actually write the label of what the axis shows. So this shows months of the year. And then along the y-axis, we've got rainfall in millimeters. So you would need to make sure you label it, and you'd need to have a title for your graph as well. Just for time, I'll let you think about that. And then you'd be ready to plot your points. So I'd be able to look at where January is, and I'd be able to look at where 54 is. And because I've labelled the lines, I'd be able to find 50 and then a little bit more. So if I just count 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, it's there, 50. And then the next point would be 55, so I want to go just below 55, about there. And then I'd be able to draw my lines and connect up my dots, and that would show the line for the average rainfall. So if you haven't already, pause the video and see if you can draw your own version of that line graph. Okay, on the next page, there's a question I want you to think about. This is how Chloe has drawn her line graph. Do you agree with how she has done it? Try to plot the points of data on her graph and see if you can think about any suggestions for Chloe. So pause the video now. Okay, so Chloe, you might have noticed, has labelled the spaces, which makes it really hard to plot the points of data, because if I wanted to plot January, which is 54, I don't quite know where I'm meant to plot January, because that whole space is January. So am I meant to put my dot sort of on this side of the square, or in the middle, or on this side, because then it would be February. This line, it would be a bit unclear which one was January or February. And then if I look up here, this whole square has been labelled as 50. And so I wouldn't be able to find 54 very easily, because the next square would probably be 60. And so I'm kind of going from 50 to 60 with nothing in between. And so remember that we want to make sure we label the lines, so we've got all the divisions in between our labelled axes. And you probably might have noticed as well that unfortunately she didn't check her scale, so she started counting in 5s but then went into counting in 10s, and there was a big space missed out. So remember that you've got to make sure that your labels are evenly spaced, regularly spaced, the same distance apart, and that they are counting in the scale that you've chosen. Okay, super. Now you've got some independent practice. So there are 3 experiments over the next 3 pages, and I want you to choose one of those to collect some data, and then I want you to present that data on a line graph, thinking about what we've just discussed. Remember the key questions, and remember that you'll need to label and number each axis, and then include the right units, and then plot the points and connect them all together. So just to whiz through them, this one is one that you should be able to do on your own, hopefully, if you've got paper and a ruler. This one, please ask if you need adult help to get a 2-litre plastic drinks bottle, or some kind of other container would do. You might need an adult to help you if you want to cut that down. So adult assistance might be needed for that one. Adult assistance is definitely needed for this one, collecting information about temperature, because it involves investigating how quickly hot water cools down. So please don't attempt this without adult assistance. You need an adult to help you get some hot water and to help you take the measurements so that you keep safe and don't burn yourself. I trust you, so I think you'll be okay doing that with an adult. Then there's a deeper thinking task, so have a little think about that, and remember that the deeper thinking answers are at the end, but don't skip ahead. If you need squared paper, there is some squared paper at the end of the PDF. So good luck, and it would be great to see how you get on, okay? And hopefully you'll enjoy creating your line graphs. Okay, bye everyone.